The 5 a.m. air was cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs, a sharp, metallic bite that promised another brutal city morning. For Talia, it was the smell of work. It mingled with the scent of yeasty dough and dark roast coffee beans, a perfume she wore like a second skin. Her world was the 4-foot by 8-foot interior of The Daily Grind, an orange food truck that was both her cage and her kingdom. From this cramped space, she served up warmth in cardboard cups and paper bags, a small, reliable sun in the gray dawn of the financial district. The lines started forming before the first hint of light bruised the sky, a shuffling queue of suits and uniforms, all of them chasing the caffeine that would fuel their climb up whatever ladder they were on. Talia moved with an economy of motion born from thousands of identical mornings. Her hands, nimble and sure, ground the beans, steamed the milk, and sliced the bagels in a fluid, unbroken rhythm. She knew most of her regulars by name, their orders committed to memory. A double-shot latte for Mr. Henderson, an everything bagel, toasted, with cream cheese for the security guard named Frank. She offered a tired smile with every transaction, a small piece of herself given away for a few dollars. But there was one customer who remained an enigma. He always appeared at the tail end of the rush, as if waiting for the chaos to subside. He was tall, impeccably dressed in dark, tailored suits that seemed to absorb the light around him, making him a void in the bustling cityscape. He never spoke, never smiled, never even looked at her directly. He would simply stand at the back of the line, his hands in his pockets, his posture radiating a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. His presence was a silent, heavy note in the cheerful morning symphony of her truck. The other customers gave him a wide berth, a subconscious recognition of an apex predator in their midst. Talia treated him with a detached professionalism. He was just an order. One large black coffee, no room for cream, no sugar. She'd take his crisp bill, hand him his change and his cup, and he would nod once before melting back into the city's shadows. She didn't know his name, and she didn't want to. He represented a world so far removed from her own that it felt like a different dimension, one of cold glass towers and unspoken agreements made in hushed tones. Today, however, was different. The grinder had jammed, the milk steamer was spitting angrily, and the line was a grumpy, impatient snake coiling around the corner. By the time the silent man reached the counter, Talia's reserves of pleasantness were completely depleted. She took his order with a clipped, "Black coffee, right?" Not even waiting for a response. She slammed the cup down, sloshing a bit of the dark liquid over the rim. He paid, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup, a brief, unexpected touch of warmth against her cold skin. He didn't leave. He just stood there, his dark eyes finally meeting hers, holding her gaze with an unnerving intensity. The noise of the city seemed to fade into a dull roar. He leaned forward, the steam from the coffee creating a swirling mist between them, his voice a low, quiet rumble that cut through the morning chill. "Still remember me?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy as the winter fog. It was so unexpected, so deeply personal, that Talia's practiced customer service mask fell away, leaving her utterly exposed. Her mind raced, flipping through a mental Rolodex of faces, trying to place him. A professor from the community college courses she took at night? A landlord from a past apartment?
No.
His face, now that she was truly looking at it, was one she felt she should know, yet it remained stubbornly out of reach. It was a face carved from sharp angles and soft shadows, with eyes that held a universe of stories she couldn't read. They were old eyes, she realized, filled with a melancholy that didn't belong on someone who looked to be in his late 20s. The faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow was a detail she'd never noticed before. He saw the confusion warring with a flicker of something else in her expression. A small, sad smile touched his lips, a fleeting gesture that seemed to cost him a great deal of effort. It transformed his severe features, softening them for just a moment, offering a glimpse of a different man beneath the armor of his expensive suit. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the river of pedestrians. Talia was left standing in her small orange truck, the ghost of his question echoing in her ears. The scent of his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something clean like rain, lingered behind. She was so rattled that she burned the next bagel and gave a customer decaf instead of regular, earning a disgruntled frown. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Every time she looked up, she half expected to see him standing there again, his quiet presence a question mark at the edge of her vision. Who was he? And what could he possibly mean? Her life was a simple, contained loop. The truck, her tiny apartment, her textbooks. There was no room in it for mysterious men in bespoke suits who spoke in riddles. Yet, the encounter had unsettled something deep within her. It was the way he'd looked at her, not as a service worker, a nameless face behind a counter, but as someone he knew, as someone who mattered. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the late-night train. His face floated in her memory, those dark, knowing eyes, and his whispered words replayed over and over. Still remember me? It wasn't just a question. It felt like a plea, a bridge extended from a past she couldn't recall, a past where their paths had somehow, impossibly, crossed. The thought was a strange comfort and a profound disturbance, a stone dropped into the placid waters of her carefully managed life, the ripples spreading out into the darkness. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that this was not the end of it. He would be back. He did come back, but he changed the rules of their silent game. The next morning, he arrived before the sun, before the first customer, while Talia was still wrestling with the truck's stubborn awning. He wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, clothes that made him look younger, more approachable. He didn't stand back and wait. He walked right up to the counter and held out a steaming cup from a different cafe. "Peace offering," he said, his voice a little rough in the morning air. "For yesterday." "I shouldn't have been so cryptic." Talia eyed the cup suspiciously, then looked at him. Without the armor of his suit, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. "I don't accept coffee from strangers," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. He gave that same small, sad smile. "My name is June." "Now, we're not strangers." He placed the cup on her counter and took a step back, giving her space. I saw you," and a memory came back. It was probably nothing. The apology felt genuine, and despite her apprehension, she found herself picking up the cup. The warmth seeped into her cold hands. She took a tentative sip. It was perfect. From that day on, a new routine began to form. June would arrive early each morning, not as a customer, but as a quiet companion. He'd bring her coffee and simply sit on a nearby concrete ledge, watching the city wake up. He never pushed for conversation, but when she spoke, he listened with an unnerving focus, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. He started noticing the little things, the struggles she tried so hard to hide. He saw the way she winced when she lifted the heavy bags of coffee beans, and the next day, a sleek, ergonomic hand truck was leaning against the side of her truck. No note, no explanation. He heard the wheezing death rattle of her old generator, and a few days later, a silent, powerful new one was delivered and installed by a discreet crew while she was away buying supplies. Talia was both grateful and deeply unsettled. "You have to stop this," she told him one morning, gesturing to the new, insulated gloves he'd left on the counter. "I can't accept these things." June just shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Think of it as an investment in a quality product. Your bagels taste better when your hands aren't frozen." His detached tone was at odds with the profound thoughtfulness of his actions. A strange, fragile trust began to grow between them, nurtured by these small, unspoken kindnesses. She started setting aside the last everything bagel for him, making sure it was perfectly toasted, with just the right amount of cream cheese. It was her way of speaking his silent language, a small gesture of care returned in kind. One afternoon, a sudden downpour sent her few remaining customers scattering for cover. The rain hammered against the metal roof of the truck, a relentless, drumming beat that cocooned them in a world of gray water and glistening asphalt. June had been sitting on his usual ledge, but he moved to take shelter under the truck's narrow awning, his shoulder just inches from hers. The proximity was electric, a sudden intimacy that made the cramped space feel even smaller. They stood in silence for a while, watching the rain wash the city clean. The rhythmic drumming seemed to unlock something in Talia's memory, a vague feeling of melancholy and nostalgia. "I hate this kind of rain," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the storm. "It reminds me of things I'd rather forget." June turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "What kind of things?" he asked softly. It was the most direct, personal question he had ever asked. Something about the storm, the isolation, made her want to answer. She found herself telling him about her dream, the one she kept locked away like a precious secret. She described her bakery, not a truck, but a real place with walls and windows, a place that smelled of cinnamon and baking bread, a place of warmth and community. She spoke of her childhood, in a forgotten, rundown neighborhood called Havenwood, a place she hadn't visited in over a decade, not since her grandmother, her last family, had passed away. As she spoke the name Havenwood, a shadow crossed June's face. It was a flicker of deep, resonant pain, so quick she almost missed it. He was suddenly very still, his body tense. "Havenwood," he repeated, the word sounding foreign and heavy on his tongue. "I knew a place there. A corner store on Cypress Street. It had a faded blue awning, always flapping in the wind." Talia froze, her heart giving a painful lurch. Her grandmother's apartment had been right above that store. She could still picture that tattered blue awning, could hear the sound it made on windy days, a sound that was the backdrop to her entire childhood. How could he possibly know that? It was such a specific, insignificant detail from a place no one remembered.
How?
"How do you know that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared out at the rain, his jaw tight. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were filled with a profound sadness that seemed to swallow the light. "Because I used to spend every day sitting on the steps of that store," he said, his voice low and strained. "Hoping someone would notice I was there." The rain fell harder, a torrent against the roof, but Talia barely heard it. The world had narrowed to the space between them, to the impossible, earth-shattering weight of his words. The memory didn't rush back. It trickled in, a slow, painful thaw. The sound of the rain, the faded blue awning, and a boy. A scrawny, silent boy with haunted eyes and clothes that were too big for him. He was always there, perched on the grimy steps of the corner store, his knees drawn up to his chest, watching the world with a detachment that broke her young heart. He never spoke, never played with the other kids. He just existed, a ghost in the periphery of her childhood. And she, a little girl with a fierce sense of justice and a bagel clutched in her hand, had noticed him. She remembered walking up to him, her heart thumping with a mixture of fear and determination. She had broken her bagel in half, an everything bagel, her favorite, and held a piece out to him. He had looked at the bagel, then at her, his dark eyes wide with a disbelief that was more painful than hunger. He had taken it, his small, cold fingers brushing against hers. He never said thank you, but he didn't have to. The way he devoured that small offering was thanks enough. She had done it every day for a week, sharing her snack, a silent ritual between two lonely children. And then one day he was gone. Mignon. The name came out as a breath, a ghost of a word she hadn't spoken in 15 years. It felt alien on her tongue, a key to a door she had long since sealed shut. His entire body went rigid. He closed his eyes, a flicker of raw emotion passing over his face before he managed to compose himself. When he opened them again, they were glistening. He nodded slowly, a single, sharp movement. "I didn't think you would. I didn't think anyone remembered that name," he said, his voice thick. The pieces crashed together in Talia's mind, forming a picture that was both unbelievable and undeniably true. The quiet, powerful man in the suit was the hungry, forgotten boy from the steps. The chasm between their two worlds suddenly vanished, replaced by a bridge of shared memory, a single act of childhood kindness that had somehow endured for over a decade. He was the reason she always made sure to have food to give to the homeless who sometimes passed her truck. The memory of his silent hunger had imprinted itself on her soul. "I never forgot you," Min-jun said, his voice cracking with an emotion he could no longer contain. "That bagel. You have no idea what that meant. It wasn't just food. It was proof. Proof that someone saw me. That I existed," he explained, in clipped, hesitant sentences. What had happened? He'd been an orphan, lost in the system, until he was taken in by a man who saw potential in his quiet resilience. He was given a new name, a new life, a world of power and danger she couldn't begin to comprehend. But he had never forgotten Havenwood. He had never forgotten her. Their dynamic shifted entirely. The fragile, tentative connection forged over coffee and bagels was now cemented in the bedrock of a shared history. He was no longer June, the intimidating benefactor. He was Min-jun, the boy she had shown a simple kindness to, and in his eyes, she was no longer just Talia, the girl from the food truck. She was the first person who had ever shown him compassion. The mornings became their sanctuary. He would still arrive early, but now they talked, really talked. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of his new life, the constant pressure to be strong, to be ruthless. He never gave specifics about his business, always skirting the dark edges, but she could read the weariness in his posture, the burden he carried in the set of his shoulders. In return, she shared her own struggles, the debt from her grandmother's illness, the fear that her dream of a bakery would forever remain just that, a dream. He listened, not with pity, but with a deep, empathetic understanding. He took her business plan, a collection of hopeful scribbles in a worn notebook, and treated it with the seriousness of a corporate merger. He pointed out flaws, suggested suppliers, and explained logistics with a sharp intelligence that was breathtaking. He was teaching her, empowering her. He started bringing her things, not anonymous gifts, but thoughtful tokens of their shared past. A small bag of marbles, like the ones the kids in Havenwood used to play with. A specific brand of cheap instant noodles he remembered seeing in the corner store. Each object was a whisper from another life, a thread weaving their two disparate worlds together. One evening, he took her to a high-end restaurant, a place with white tablecloths and hushed waiters. Talia felt impossibly out of place in her simple dress, but Min-jun seemed oblivious to the stares. He just looked at her, his gaze warm and focused. "I wanted you to see this side of my life," he said quietly. "But I need you to know, it's not the real me. The real me is still that boy on the steps." It was a confession, a plea for her to see past the wealth and the power. As they left, a sleek black car pulled up, and two large men got out, their eyes constantly scanning the street. They deferred to Min-jun with a silent, profound respect that bordered on fear. It was a stark reminder of the wall that still stood between them. His world was one of shadows and silent, watchful men. Her world was one of flour and steam. The fairy tale was beautiful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that a dark, dangerous reality was waiting just outside the frame, ready to shatter it all. The shattering came on a Tuesday. The lunch rush was at its peak, a chaotic symphony of shouted orders, sizzling bacon, and the hiss of the espresso machine. Talia was in her element, a whirlwind of focused energy. Then they arrived. 3 men, dressed in clothes that were expensive but ill-fitting, oozing a cheap, predatory confidence. They didn't get in line. They swaggered to the front, pushing aside a young woman, and leaned against her counter, their smirks dripping with menace. The leader, a man with a cruel mouth and a gaudy gold watch, looked Talia up and down. Well, he drawled, his voice loud enough for the entire line to hear. "This must be the famous charity case. The Golden Coil Syndicate's new pet project." The name hit the air like a gunshot. Golden Coil Syndicate. Talia had heard whispers of them, a powerful and ruthless criminal organization that ran the city's underworld. The crowd went silent, the cheerful lunchtime buzz evaporating into tense, fearful stillness. People began to back away, their eyes wide. "I don't know what you're talking about," Talia said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to keep it steady. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, I think you do. Tell us, how much does a mafia boss's affection cost these days?" He pulled a thick wad of cash from his pocket and threw it onto the counter. The bills scattered, fluttering onto the floor of her truck like dirty confetti. "Here's a tip from the competition. We just wanted to see what kind of woman has the great Minjun wrapped around her little finger. Her safe space, her kingdom, had been violated, transformed into a stage for her public humiliation. Her regulars, people she shared smiles with every day, were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and fear. Every kind gesture from Minjun, the generator, the gloves, his patient guidance, was instantly reframed, twisted into the calculated actions of a powerful man buying a pet. He hadn't been kind. He had been purchasing her, marking his territory. The betrayal was a physical pain, a hot knife twisting in her gut. Just then, a black car screeched to a halt at the curb. Minjun got out, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw the men, the money on the floor, and the look of utter devastation on Talia's face. His world had finally crashed into hers, just as she had feared. He took a step toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Are you the head of the golden coil?" He couldn't lie. The agony in his eyes was his only answer. It was all the confirmation she needed. "Get away from my truck," she said, her voice small but filled with steel. "All of you. And don't ever come back." For 3 days, the orange truck remained closed, its service window shut tight, like a stubborn eye refusing to see the world. The corner it occupied felt unnaturally quiet, a void in the city's morning rhythm. Inside her small apartment, Talia felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind, the cruel laughter, the scattered money, the shocked faces of her customers. But worst of all was the memory of Minjun's face, the silent confirmation that had shattered everything. The kindness she had cherished, the connection she had believed was rooted in a pure, shared past, now felt like a lie. Had he sought her out to atone for his dark world? Was she just a project, a way for a crime boss to feel human for a few hours a day? The thought was a deep, searing shame. She felt foolish, naive, and incredibly small. Her dream of a bakery, which had felt so close, so real when he was helping her, now seemed like a childish fantasy. His touch had tainted it. His world had poisoned hers. The community she had built, one coffee and one smile at a time, had been fractured. A few regulars had texted, their messages filled with concern, but she couldn't bring herself to reply. How could she explain that the quiet, kind man who bought everyone coffee on rainy days was also a figure of fear and violence? Meanwhile, across the city, Minjun sat in a sterile, minimalist penthouse that overlooked the sprawling metropolis. The view was panoramic, a glittering tapestry of a million lights, a kingdom at his feet. But he had never felt more isolated. He had power, wealth, and the fear of his enemies, but the one thing he craved, the simple, uncomplicated warmth of Talia's smile, was lost to him. He could have his men deal with the rivals who had humiliated her, could make them disappear with a single phone call. But that was the problem. That was the poison. Violence and intimidation were the only tools his life had given him, and they were useless here. They couldn't mend trust. They couldn't heal a wounded heart. He looked at his hands that signed orders that could end lives, and remembered the feeling of them brushing against hers. He understood now that in trying to keep his two worlds separate, he had only ensured they would collide more violently. Hiding his identity wasn't about protecting her. It was about protecting himself from her judgment, from the revulsion he was sure she would feel. He had wanted her to see only Minjun, the boy, while he remained June, the boss. He had been a coward, and his cowardice had cost him the only pure connection he had ever known. He finally understood the difference between their two acts of kindness. Hers as a child had been selfless. His, as a man, had been selfish, tangled up in his own need for redemption. To earn back even a fraction of her trust, he would have to do the one thing his entire life had trained him never to do: show weakness. He would have to become vulnerable. On the fourth day, Talia forced herself to open the truck. The morning was gray and damp, mirroring her mood. The crowd was smaller, more hesitant. The easy chatter was gone, replaced by a strained, awkward silence. She felt like an exhibit in a zoo, the Mafia boss's girl. She kept her head down, focusing on the mechanics of making coffee, her movements stiff and robotic. Around 10 o'clock, she saw him. He wasn't in his black car, and his imposing bodyguards were nowhere in sight. Minjun was walking down the street, alone. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, the kind of anonymous clothing that made him blend in. He didn't come to the window. He walked to the back of a small, shuffling line and waited. He stood there for a full 10 minutes, his head bowed, enduring the curious and hostile stares of the other customers. He looked smaller without his armor of wealth and power, just a man waiting his turn. When he finally reached the front, the air was thick with tension. Talia braced herself, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She expected excuses, justifications, maybe even a threat. Instead, he just looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice clear and steady, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. "I'm sorry for lying to you. I'm sorry for bringing my world to your doorstep and for letting you get hurt." He didn't try to defend himself. He owned his deception completely. "You were right to be angry. You were right to send me away." He took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "When I was a boy, your kindness was the only real thing in my life. It was a light. And when I found you again, I was selfish. I wanted to be near that light, but I was too much of a coward to show you the darkness I live in. I wasn't trying to buy you, Talia. I was just trying to feel something good again." His public confession was a stunning act of self-immolation for a man whose entire existence depended on an image of untouchable strength. He then placed a small, flat box on the counter and slid it toward her. "This isn't a gift," he said softly. "It's restitution. It's an apology I can't say with words." He stepped back. "Whatever you decide, I'll accept it. If you want me to leave and never come back, I will." He turned, ready to walk away, having laid his pride and his heart bare on the pavement for her and the whole world to see. Talia stared at the box, her heart hammering against her ribs. The small crowd was silent, watching her, waiting for her verdict. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not jewelry or cash, but a single, old-fashioned key and a folded document. It was the deed to a small, vacant storefront on a quiet side street a few blocks away. The perfect spot for a bakery. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, handed to her. A clean slate, a way out. This was his power in action, the ability to change a life with the stroke of a pen. It would be so easy to take it, to accept his apology and let him walk away forever. She could have her dream, free and clear of him and his dangerous world. But as she looked at his retreating back, she didn't see the powerful head of the Golden Coil Syndicate. She saw Minjun, the lonely boy from the steppes, offering up the only thing he knew how to give. And she realized that the dream wasn't just about the building. It was about the hope he had reawakened in her, the belief that she was worthy of it. Taking the deed would feel like a transaction, the very thing she had accused him of. It would be an ending. And she found, to her own surprise, that she didn't want their story to end. "Wait," she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. He stopped, his shoulders tense, but he didn't turn around. She took a deep breath. "I don't want it like this." She picked up the key and the deed, her fingers closing around the cold metal. The remaining customers began to quietly disperse, sensing this was a private moment they had no right to witness. She walked around the counter and approached him, stopping a few feet away. He finally turned to face her, his expression guarded, braced for the final rejection. She held out the box. "I want to earn it," she said softly but firmly. "I want to build it myself." But she hesitated, the next words feeling momentous, life-altering. "I could use a business partner. Someone who knows about logistics and suppliers." It wasn't just forgiveness. It was an invitation. A new set of terms for a new beginning, built on honesty this time. A slow, incredulous hope dawned in Minjun's eyes, chasing away the shadows. A real smile, not the sad, fleeting thing she was used to, spread across his face, and it was like seeing the sun for the first time. "I think I know a guy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Weeks later, the orange food truck was parked outside the dusty, glass-fronted store. Inside, Talia and Minjun stood in the middle of the empty space, sunlight streaming through the grimy windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes. They were both covered in a fine layer of plaster dust, looking over a set of blueprints spread across a makeshift table. He was pointing to a section of the plan, explaining the best placement for the ovens, and she was laughing, a real, unburdened laugh. The road ahead was uncertain. His world hadn't vanished. Its dangers were still real. But for the first time, they were facing it together, not as a boss and his project, or a ghost and his memory, but as partners, building something new from the ground up on a foundation of truth.